So in this session, we have the wonderful Anni Domingo, who is in a train in the UK somewhere. We'll get on the Zoom soon. She wrote this terrific book, Breaking the Maafa Chain, which is based on real research about Queen Victoria's black goddaughter. And there's a fictionalized version of the sister who's taken from Sierra Leone. It's really, really good reading. It's very hard to stop reading. And she is on volume 2 at the moment. Then we also have the wonderful Diana, and we're very blessed to have you with us. I always felt that Annie and Diana have a lot in common. I know they liked each other immediately, and the work that they do, I think, is powerfully similar. They're both looking at the past, sometimes, not always at the past, but I think speaking for other people, being conduits for making it a better present. It's not art for art's sake, it's something else. It's the poet as, I don't know if it's prophet, but it's sort of linked to the past so that we go back to the past to change the future. And we see the past as different too. Annie has done this very nice little video, which we're going to show the first 12 minutes of, Dickens on Slavery. This is fascinating too, because as you will hear, Dickens could be in America at the moment. So the past, there's horror in the past, but there are other things in the past as well, which I think your work does for the love of sorrow, and looking at other people. There's going back to the past in order to find ways to find hope in the past for the future and the present. But this is, I think, quite remarkable. We're only going to show 12 minutes, 12.30 minutes. And I think we should, later on in the Writing Centre, have a full viewing. It's about 33 minutes. So if you're interested in seeing more, you're very welcome to come to a second viewing or to just follow the link yourselves. But in the meantime, meet Annie.
When I was 7 in Africa. I was cast a tiny Jim in A Christmas Carol, and I was transported into another world. To me, it was not make-believe. I fell for the Cratchits, I hated Scrooge, and fell in love with Dickens. And as a ferocious reader, I started to devour his books. Charles Dickens created some of the world's best-known fictional characters, and is regarded by many as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. He was famous for his humor, satire, and keen observation of character and society. His novels covered, amongst many themes, death of children, alcoholism and its effect on families, suicidal deaths, greed, poverty, and the satire of the British manipulation. I was surprised to find out that after his first visit to the United States in 1842, writing about his impression in the travelogue American Notes for General Circulation, Dickens included a powerful condemnation of slavery.
My first exposure was also A Christmas Carol, the musical performed at my sister's middle school in California with an already hugely gifted Val Kilmer in the lead role. I was 10. The effect was profound. I felt the lack of true connection and charity in my own little circle. Since then, I've also devoured many of his novels, but I didn't know until this year, the 150th anniversary of his death, upon reading American Notes, that Charles Dickens had written about slavery. A conversation with Annie followed. When Dickens visited, it was just 19 years before the start of the U.S. Civil War. The country was probably not at its best, I thought. And Dickens seemed to think so too. This is what he wrote about the members of the United States Congress after his visit to Washington.
Did I see among the intelligence and refinement, the true, honest, patriotic heart of America? Here and there, little drops of its flowing life, but they scarcely coloured the stream of desperate adventurers which sets that way for profit and for pay. It is the game of these men, and of their profligate organs, to make the strife of politics so fierce and brutal, and so destructive of all self-respecting worthy men, that sensitive and delicate-minded persons shall be kept aloof, and they, such as they, be left to battle out their selfish views unchecked. And thus, the lowest of all scrambling fights goes on, and they who in other countries would, from their intelligence and station, most aspire to make the laws, do here recoil the farthest from that degradation.
Well, I thought, not much has changed perhaps. And when I posted that quote on social media, a UK friend responded, and it's different here how exactly? Likes followed.
When I hear that, I agree that sadly not much has changed in America, or here, it seems. And that matters a lot. How can it be that over 175 years later, what Charles Dickens wrote still stands true?
So he was disappointed, but he was still hoping to learn something. As a merciless critic of British inequality, he had created of the USA a new Republic of My Imagination, where liberty and justice for all would be seen in action. He had arranged visits to prisons, orphanages, and schools for the blind and deaf.
Dickens' books were hugely popular in America, so he expected to be, and was, feted and fed across the 26 states that were then part of the Union. But as the tour progressed, he realized that the USA he had hoped to see was indeed only in his imagination. He soon found out that the motto of liberty and justice was not for all. It is this ability of Dickens to expose the wrongs in society that made him one of my favorite authors. I knew that there would be no sugarcoating.
Though he did find things and people to admire in the States, there was too much that disgusted and infuriated him. Spitting tobacco was one thing. He describes having to leave his clothes in puddles of brown saliva in the shared sleeping quarters of a riverboat. Then there was what he called the love of smart dealing.
The following dialogue I have held 100 times. Is it not a very disgraceful circumstance that such a man as so-and-so should be acquiring a large property by the most infamous and odious means, and notwithstanding all the crimes of which he has been guilty, should be tolerated and abetted by your citizens? He is a public nuisance, is he not? Yes, sir. A convicted liar. Yes, sir. And he is utterly dishonourable, debased, and profligate. Yes, sir. In the name of wonder, then, what is his merit? Well, sir, he's a smart man.
If Charles Dickens was here right now, I think he would be asking the same questions.
But by far the most disgusting outrage, one he gave an entire chapter to in American Notes, was slavery. Slavery itself as an institution of oppression and dehumanization, and equally the hypocrisy which supporting it had required in the hearts and minds of the American people.
Is it the master, sir? Returned the girl, with a hesitation which seemed to imply that they were rather flush of majors in that establishment. The master? Said Colonel Diver, stopping short and looking round at his war correspondent.
Oh, the depressing institutions of that British Empire, Colonel,
Said Jefferson Brick.
Master. Well, What's the matter with the word?
Asked Martin.
I should hope it was never heard in our country, sir, that's all.
Said Jefferson Brick.
Except when it is used by some degraded help as new to the blessings of our form of government as this help is. There are no masters here. All owners, are they?
Martin.
Some critics have pointed out that Charles Dickens was not completely free of the racial prejudice endemic in his time, but clearly the institution of slavery repulsed him.
Cash for Negroes. Cash for Negroes. Cash for Negroes is the heading of these advertisements in great capitals down the long columns of the crowded journals. Woodcuts of a runaway Negro with manacled hands, crouching beneath a bluff pursuer in top boots who, having caught him, grasps him by the throat, agreeably diversify the pleasant text. The leading article protests against that abominable and hellish doctrine of abolition, which is repugnant alike to every law of God and nature. The delicate Mama, who smiles her acquiescence in this sprightly writing as she reads the paper in her cool piazza, quiets her youngest child who clings about her skirts by promising the boy a whip to beat the little Negroes with.
A Negro boy about 12 years old, had round his neck a chain dog collar with the lamp hat engraved on it.
Several marks of lashing, irons on her feet, a Negro and two children. Black man, a few days before she went off, a burnt iron on the left side of her face. I tried to make the letter M.
Run away.
Ran away.
Run away.
Run away.
Dickens collected many of these classic advertisements from the local papers.
Even with the open wounds of 2020, these pages of adverts disturbed and shocked me in a new way, a way I hadn't read before. Even though I've read the books, I've seen the movies, I've seen the videos.
Yes, those advertisements are shocking. But I'm not shocked or surprised, because this is not new knowledge to Black people. These were our ancestors who had been bought and sold and who had somehow managed to escape, fleeing from degradation and cruelty, fleeing for their lives. As a Black person in England, this is something that has been spoken about and then glossed over for a very long time. You see, when I read about Black people in chains, iron collars, scarred, shot in the back, it is not in the past. For me, because I can think of so many recent incidences, similar atrocities in the treatment of Black people today. If you get shot or knifed, it ends up being the same, whether it's 1842 or 2020. Most Black people, whether in America or in England, France or in China, still live with almost the same fear felt by those enslaved long before we were born.
The news report.
Fires are still burning in Brixton in South London after an evening of rioting. It began to demonstrate in anger after police...
This on the Standard Time, Jamie April was bundled into a back room. He's the first of the...
Right. It's a powerful piece. Yes, and Annie is in the Zoom meeting. How do we do that to get to Zoom?
Minimize this video here.
Wasn't that piece about politics in America so incredibly present? With it's so noisy and anyone who's being reasonable can't speak.
Let's just see. Oh, there are people in the waiting room.
Excellent. Annie,
Mid twice just for good luck, I suppose. Whichever wins out. Go full screen.
excellent.
And he seems to be connecting. Let's change this to.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I've had to go on my phone. I'm having so much problem with, I'm on my phone rather than on the internet because I can't get it going. Oh dear. Anyway, hello.
Hello, and you're on a screen.
Yeah.
So
I'm
we have a few people here already, Annie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. And Diana's here too.
I can see Diana sitting there. Hello, Diana. I'm on my little screen on the television. It seems to be going blurry.
Oh, that's the filter on the. I can try to turn that off, I suppose. Let me just.
We'll just try and get rid of the that's, I think, my setting.
Yes. Let's see. So I'll untick that.
Right.
Is that better?
Is that better, Annie?
Oh, that's much better. Oh
Lovely.
dear Lord.
Well done.
I'm not sure if anyone can hear. I think it is recording.
It's recording.
Yeah, it has the little recording.
Can people hear us?
No, but Annie is not very cool. Can you
Yes.
turn her up?
I'm in the midst of trying to do that. Okay, the output. Yes, that is the question.
If you go on the audio setting.
If you come around, that'll be very helpful.
Just now the audio output.
Yeah, it was coming through the.
But why don't we hear her now? Where are these?
You can hear me, can't you?
Yes, we just want to protect it over the speakers. That's the only.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, Lord.
What are those?
It was.
Have a bit of a rest,
That
Annie. It'll
was
probably be a
the-
few
the-
minutes.
Chris.
Yes.
Okay. And
Yes.
Annie, speak,
Yeah.
please.
Hello, how are you?
Hey.
Hey.
Can I show Annie the room?
Sure.
Right. So
Oh,
Annie,
yes.
a few people here. There we go.
Oh, fantastic. Hello, hi, everybody.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, we've just enjoyed the first part of that brilliant film about Dickens. So thank you for that.
Yes, that was, I did that about 3 years ago, but it's been on a paywall because I did it for the Cambridge Literary Festival. And you had to pay to see it for the first 2 or 3 years or something. And now I can do it freely. So that's why I sent it. So there you go.
Lovely.
Diana, my dear Diana, how are you?
Ah, Annie, my dear Annie, I'm well, and you?
Oh, just busy as always, running around, like a headless chicken.
Ah. Admiring you, having all that energy.
Oh, you have it too.
So do you. It's nice to see you both.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.
Lovely to see you. So I go back to when we met at the Paglia Festival, which was thanks to Philippa. Thank you for that, Philippa. And the strongest memory is going to the fort.
Yes.
And I think you were also going to a fort at the same time.
Yes.
Which was
yes.
quite interesting. So it's in Accra, so it's going to one of those forts. And
I think you were going to the Cape Coast one.
Yes.
Yes, we went to the coast.
And I went the next day or 2 days later. And then I also went to the Elmina Castle.
Yes.
Yeah.
We saw the fort, that one, from the fort that we were at.
Yes. That was the one that was
closer
closer to Accra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think seeing the fort and seeing that coast and seeing the many, many forts makes one realize the reality of that crime very, very deeply. And it changes everything. I mean, you
Yes.
once read before, but actually being there and actually standing on the ground, which is brown and red, you're standing on their DNA. You go to those places and everything has changed. The present has changed. We understand how the present is built on that. And one of the things that really struck me about the fort was concealment.
Yes.
So the governor and his wife are in an airy bedroom upstairs, and there's a whole horizon. It's nice, and the men slaves were in this huge dungeon underneath. When they were taken to the gate of no return, it was behind walls, so they wouldn't see. So the governor's wife, and one thing is they didn't live very long because they got malaria. But anyway, the governor's wife, when they went to church, they'd go to church over this little walkway. She'd lift up her skirts, and she walked over a hatch. This hatch went straight down into the men's dungeon.
Yes.
So every time she went to pray, lifting her skirts over the hatch. And that just made me think about how in the present we've got ways of not seeing, of cutting off, of being absolutely mad because we're denying foundations. We're denying what happened.
It happens all the time in all sorts of ways, you know, and it's almost as if it's not there.
Yes.
And it's a training that we have to sort of not take on board a lot of the things that have happened. And sometimes when others try to make people see it, it's like, why are you going on? It's in the past, it's over, it's done with. And the trauma and the generational trauma is not recognized. That there are certain things that happen and go on happening that we have to realize. And I don't know what part of the Charles Dickens thing you showed, but that started out because of an American friend of mine was saying how shocked she was when she read some of this. And I said, well, as a Black person, I'm not shocked because it's always been with us. It's part of our DNA. And that's part of that trauma that goes on, that people sort of see it, and sometimes they want you to react the same way that they're reacting, not recognizing that it's something that we've lived with in so many different ways, you know?
Would you like to say about how those memories relate to your work? I mean, when we walked around the fort, I went with Diana. Diana poured water all the time, and that was very beautiful and very meaningful. And I think that's connected to your work a bit, to sort of find ways to honor, to cleanse.
It's a cleansing thing. I mean, I've been to the fort in Sierra Leone a long time ago, but about 4 years ago, I was a part of a festival in the Gambia, and we went to the fort, which is on an island. And I went with another friend of mine she's from Nigeria, and it was traumatic. It was even more traumatic in a way than going to the castles in Ghana, because you had to be on a boat to take you to the island where they were stored. So you had a taste of some of that. But what I remember was that as we finished and everybody was getting back to the boat to go to the mainland, Shola and I wanted to pay some kind of respect, a libation. And they were trying to hurry us up. And we got no. And we only had our water bottles. So we took the water bottles, and we insisted that we had to do it at the spot where the slaves were usually going. We had to spend that time to give respect, to show respect, you know, and to connect. No matter how many hundreds of thousands of years, it is still part of our DNA. It is still part of our memory, you know, and that was important.
For me, I never really thought of the dungeons or, you know, of the forts. I was always occupied with the ship, the journey, and coming to the Cape, and the slaves being sold, and the kind of a life that they had. But that visit to the fort, that was you know, a thing that was missing for me. And it was very, very traumatic for me to think that people were kept there, their blood, you know, the feces, everything, and it's still on the ground, on the floor there. And the very cunning way of getting people that they caught into the dungeons, and the way that they built the dungeons is in such a way that nobody sees that they are slaves being taken away. It's just ship is parked and from the dungeon right into the ship, the slave ship.
Yeah.
That was terrible for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing, oh, my phone is falling over. The whole thing about how it went on and the knowledge that others were then knowing what was happening, both the white people and the black people. Because one of the horrendous things in the one in the Gambia was that when the slave trade was supposed to be over, the slaves that they already had in the dungeons, they said, you're free, but we're not going to take you back. You have to swim back. If you can swim back and get onto, you're free. But of course, they couldn't swim. And they were also, even those who could swim, were weakened by having been in the dungeon without food and that. And they could see the land. They could see their home. They couldn't get there. They drowned.
Oh.
And that was the final cruelty of the slavery. You're free, but you get yourself over there. And they couldn't. They couldn't. And that's what we have to remember, that even when they said the enslaved were free, how free is that freedom if you have no strength, you have no power, you have nowhere to go? It lives with us. It lives with us.
Yeah, and then also at the Cape, I'm talking about, you know, the Cape specifically because that is what I study, is that people had no place to live.
Exactly.
They had nothing. And so they had to go back to those farms to work there, or otherwise stay on the streets.
Yeah.
No, streets, or stay somewhere else where there wasn't, you know, much for them.
Yeah. It's a horrendous story that goes on. In last summer, I did a play about Mansfield Park, Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. And it was very interesting because although it's an earlier period, it deals with the same sort of mental anguish. Because I read Mansfield Park years ago and I did not recognize what it meant when it said that Sir Thomas Bertram goes to his plantation in Antigua. What did that mean? And when you look at the context of the time, it was set in 1810. That means that it was just 3 years after slave trade was abolished in England. So the people in England knew what was happening when they saw that, but it's not spoken about. It's not mentioned. And so what we did was we had 5 of us Black actors playing all the Bertrams, but also playing the enslaved because they married it with the autobiography of Mary Prince, who had been enslaved in Antigua at that period and who did come to England and write her autobiography and was taken to court because she refused to go back with her masters. And so looking at what she was going through and comparing it with what the English were talking about was very interesting. But it was also interesting to see the audience reaction, which we had because it was done out in the open. And we could see their reactions and also the conversation that they had with us afterwards, after they'd seen this play. And you realize that some of those things are so intrinsic. People don't change. You know, when we were having people coming up to us saying, oh, I thought you all were from Africa. Your English is so good. And you go, oh, my God, do we still have to go through that conversation in this day and age? Do you still think that we can't speak English, that we're not educated and so on and so on? But it is there. And when we had somebody who had to tell me that his great-great-grandfather had signed the compensation, I went, oh, the one that we've been paying for up till 2015? How can we forget about slavery and about being enslaved and the unfairness of it if we are still paying for the compensation that were given to the people who owned the Black people? Please,
Yeah.
we cannot forget about it.
Yeah, that happened in South Africa too.
Yeah.
That was actually the reason why many of the slave owners then moved away from the Cape.
Yeah.
For their slaves and went inland where they, had taken many other lands from people as well.
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you about the trauma that our people went through, and the trauma that stays with them for so long. An historian told me that, at a time at the Cape, former slaves, male slaves, they had a swagger in their walking. And we thought they were gangs. Yeah, people say they were gangs or they were the rough ones and so on. But Patrick Malay told us that, when a slave used to run away, because they had to believe that if they run far enough and long enough, they will get to their homeland.
Yes.
Yeah. But when they got caught, they cut off the tendons of their heels. And the only way that they can walk was with a swagger.
With a swagger. Yeah.
Can you see how far the memory went?
Yes.
People didn't know if they don't tell them the story, of what happened then. And that is why you're doing it. Either because they heard, maybe not heard about it, but was told somewhere in their lives, or maybe it was just a psychological trauma that sat in the body.
But I mean, part of that is that they might have seen those men walking like that, but they don't discuss it. So they just think that to be a man is to walk like that. They don't see where the origin comes from.
Yeah.
You see, because for me, this is one of the things, if we don't talk about our history, we don't know where it started. We just see sort of the results, and we make up our own reasons for those results. And they're not necessarily based on the trauma. We just know that it's part of our lives, but we don't know why it started or how it started.
Yeah, and that is why we need to write the stories.
Exactly.
I wrote about that when I heard the story from Patrick. I wrote a poem called These Men. In handwritten, yellowed journals, etched in as names of months, Greek gods or other ridiculous terms. These men were recorded to be from Java, Batavia, India, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, and Angola. In different hues of black, they staggered ashore, limping into the next set of chains, with half of their hearts only, the other half broken and buried in Java, Batavia, India, Madagascar, Mozambique, Mauritius, and Angola. And they built cities and towns, and bridges and dams. They built a house admired from afar, these men. Prison-walled bodies, but memory-free, journeyed through seas and open skies to where their true remembrance still lies. I look at them, these men, my ancestors, my fathers, my brothers, my sons, and wonder what was committed to memory by these men, my ancestors, my fathers, my brothers, my sons, who never stopped limping into the next set of chains, with half of their hearts broken and buried in the cities and towns and bridges and dams of our land. And I grieve for them, these men.
Mhm. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well said, my sister. Well said. Well
Thank you.
said. Because we have to think about it. We have to know, you know, if you don't know where you're coming from, how can you know where you're going? You know?
That-
And it's important that we don't start our journey halfway along the path, but go to the beginning and see and tread those steps and know that each one has different branches. It's not the same story, but it's based from the same story.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly, exactly. And that is, I mean, the way we lost our original names.
Yes.
Yeah, because they couldn't pronounce the name, or they just wanted to be funny.
But when they, a lot of the ones that were taken to the Caribbean or the West Indies or America, especially after it was supposed to stop, they did not want the names said out loud because it showed that they were still capturing people from Africa. You know, but they also, some of the names they gave the enslaved were ridiculously well, they were almost trying to make a point, so they called them Cicero and Olympia and give them Greek names and that these Greek names of Greek gods and Greek Athena, and then ask them to dig for cotton or sugarcane or whatever.
Yeah, yes.
So it's that dichotomy of the name that they give these people and the job and the work and the life that those people are living. But then the other thing was that when they started becoming baptized and becoming Christians, they were then given the names of the people who sponsored them as Christians, or they were given the names of their slave masters. That was their surname and so on. So a lot of it is just lost because it wasn't just even that they wanted to change their names. It was a way of showing this is my property. By giving them their name, they became their property. And, you know, in my book, Sarah Forbes Bonetta, they changed her name to Sarah Forbes for the captain who rescued her, and Bonetta after the ship that took her to England. But when she got married, she signed her African name on her register.
Wow. Wow.
So it meant that she put both names on, but it meant she put Aina, which was her original name, first. And so all these years after she'd been captured, that name is still inside of her. You know, and you have
the book, the way that
you have
she
a lot of people who later on changed their names from their or amalgamated their African names to it. And at home in Sierra Leone, a lot of people have their African name and then they have their English name. And their African name would what they would call their house name. That means that's the name that home people, your friends, your family call you. And then you have your official name. Because a lot of times nowadays, a lot of people are using their African names, their true names for their jobs and that. But there was a time, if they saw a name like that, they wouldn't even interview you. So you had to use your English name to at least get a foot in. And this is one of the things, you know?
And that is how people became ashamed.
Yes.
They became ashamed of, because they were probably mocked.
They were mocked. They would have been mocked. They would have had to change. I mean, and I'm not talking about even in the 19th century. I'm talking about the 60s, the 70s. It was only like in the 60s when they started wearing Afro hair that they even started showing some kind of respect for the look of a Black person. Because before that, if you had your hair in, and even nowadays, if you have your hair in braids at work or something, at school even, they tell you that you have to change your hairstyle. You know, people were not respected for their hair or what their hair looked like. But then if you go back to slavery, the Black women were not allowed to have their hair loose because they were said that it was temptation. So they
Yeah.
had to always have their heads tied up. And so they
Yeah.
then became a virtue with the stars that they could make with their head wraps and so on.
Yeah.
So, you know, we always find a way, but you have to go back and back to find out what it is about that. You know, it's very interesting. You know me, Diane, I could talk about it forever because I just think it's fascinating. It's
Yes.
fascinating. Yes.
Yeah, here in South Africa, here at the Cape, slaves used to run away. And then in many cases, they were taken in by Xhosa tribes. And that's why you would get surnames that slaves were like May, you get the name May. And then sometimes a guy was called maybe Jackie from Malagasy. And later, the surname became Malgas, you know, but very far from where we are. You know, years ago, it was Jackie from Malagasy and later became Malgas. And yeah, so that is a history that we in South Africa, that we must also, you know, look at, remember that there was kindness.
Yes.
You know, kindness to people.
Yes. Yes.
Them, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to keep remembering that bad as things are, there changes are coming. There have been changes, because for me, we got to remember that now there is a lot of amalgamation between the tribes, between the ethnicities, and we've got to respect somebody's ethnicity. They have both. We cannot say that all white people are this, or all South Africans are this, or all Sierra Leoneans are this, because there is a mixture. Now, my children are mixed race. So if I denigrate their father, I'm denigrating half of them.
Yes, yeah.
So we have to find a way of telling our truths without making our children ashamed of who they are.
Exactly.
I think that's a good point to end that discussion. I knew you two should be brought together. And I think we should have more conversations between you both. I think we do have a little bit of time. So are there questions from the room? Yes.
I have a question for Dan, and I think, should I come closer?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not planning on being in front.
You can stand in it. Okay.
So my question for Diana and Fanny is around, so as a person who's a descendant of the enslaved in South Africa, it was only at university level that I found out I was a descendant of the enslaved, because the history is not so mainstream in my community, especially where I come from. And I think, Antonella, you would know that in where I come from in Alderwater Park, there's such a big violence problem. And I think it's because there's that missing link that we don't even know where our traumas come from. We don't even know where our history is. So do you think there is a place for us as authors, as writers, to bring the history into the mainstream, to people who would not have access to the academic halls of university, to know that they are the ancestors of people who have triumphed, who have created languages, who have, you know, built and innovated?
Thank you for that question, Terry. Yes, Annie.
I absolutely, I am passionate about that. So right now I am writing my sequel to Breaking the Maafa Chain, looking at Sarah's daughter, but I'm also doing it as part of my PhD. So I'm writing an academic paper to go with it on the Black Victorians, especially those who were attached between Freetown, Sierra Leone, and Britain and London, because you need to understand that there was a lot of traffic in between and that they were not all enslaved. When we're talking about it, I'm at King's College University in London, and in my research, there were 3 men from Sierra Leone who were studying to be doctors at King's College in 1858.
Wow.
Slavery hadn't finished in America, you know, and in Sierra Leone, they had their first university was in 1827. Slavery was still in England. They hadn't passed the final slave trade was over. So we have education, we have knowledge, we have a status that does not have to be just about being enslaved. Africa had their kingdoms, their kings, their queens, and societies long before slavery. And we always sort of seem to just end up on the period of being enslaved, forgetting the richness of our education and our lives. And we need to put that joining, saying, yes, that was a period. Enslavement was there, it was bad, but that was not all that we were. We were not all enslaved. We had a lot even before and after and during. There was a school for, a boarding school for boys in Clapham, London in 1797. You know, these were Black boys coming for education. There were black people in Elizabeth the first times in London, so many that she passed an edict that there were too many Black people in London. It means that there weren't one or two sort of enslaved people there. We have a community, we have an education, we have a story that is more than just about being enslaved. And we have to let our children know that and be proud of who they are.
Yeah, to come to Terry's question, the aftermath of slavery, we still find the area where she comes from, Eldorado Park. And then if you go to everywhere, the descendants of the slaves are going through terrible, terrible times.
Mm-hmm.
Violence, poverty, name it.
Yeah.
And many times, most of the times, it's violence against each other.
Each other.
And and as Terry says, we should tell that story.
Yes.
Sit them down and say, this is who you are. This is what your ancestors went through.
Yes.
They stood strong so that you are here today. And this is not what they foresaw for you.
No.
So know that you come from far.
Exactly.
And you've got to, those ancestors, you've got to, promise them that you all those suffering that they went through,
was not in vain.
You will soothe their pain.
Yes.
Not inflict more pain.
Yeah.
But the problem is there is not enough channels in which we can tell it.
Yes.
There's not enough. It should be in schools. It's half of it's in schools. I believe that 2 years ago, government said that slavery should be taught in schools. You know what some teachers do? Some schools, they teach American slavery history.
Yes.
Not Cape East, not South African slavery history. So I don't know, because some people, if they just feel that our story is not strong enough, or is it something to be ashamed of, or are they scared of something? But this is what's happening in our schools. I mean, here I am as a writer. I go to schools. Hardly any school invite me to come and talk about slavery. And I've got poems that I've written on slavery. But if you go to a community, when my first book came out, Ons kom vandaan, it's Afrikaans, where we come from. I went to, it was my goal that I wanted to make it accessible for my people. And so I went into communities and I sold the book very cheap, like 30 Rand a book, so that people could buy it. And then I read to them the title poem, Ons kom vandaan, where we come from. And you should have seen how people's eyes lit up when I said, this is us. When I tell them, now we are called January, February, March, April. Fransman, Gabir. But somewhere, long ago, very far from here, we celebrated our festivals under own name.
Yes.
It's enlightening, sad, painful. But yeah, to know I have a kom vandaan. I have a where I come from.
Yeah. To know where you come from, you know where you're going. Exactly. Yeah.
A question from Philippa.
Hi,
Hello.
Philippa.
Hi, Annie, fellow daughter of African. I'm so happy to be here to listen to you and hear your wisdom. I'm interested in your writerly process in terms of how, like, because a lot of the story, a lot of part of the stuff that you do is you imagine.
Yeah.
You imagine, and you're drawing on historical fact, and also you're adding imagination. And I'm just wanted to ask you to just talk a little bit about the balance and how you find those words. Thank you.
Because I write historical fiction, I'm interested also in the history, but I'm writing about a period that I wasn't alive. So I have to have my prompts. What is it that moves me on to the next thing? So for example, when I started to write about Sarah Forbes-Bonnetta, it was because I knew a little bit about her, because I know her family. I know her descendants. But where is the truth? I look at Queen Victoria's biographies and so on. They don't mention this woman. They don't mention her as a child. So I went to the source. I went to Queen Victoria's diaries, and she mentions the exact time and date when she meets Sarah for the first time. Oh. She says, today I met my Black goddaughter. She talks about her being intelligent, about her English very good, and so on. I go, oh. Then this was on November the 11th. January 6th, she wrote, I met my Black goddaughter for the 4th time. And that gets my interest. Why is this woman, the queen, seeing this child 4 times with Christmas in between? What did they talk about? Why did she is so interesting? So I have to then plot my story on those facts. I have to use my imagination. I read backwards and I read forwards and say, this is what is likely to have happened. And then you find their history. You find out that Queen Victoria had several godchildren, quite a few godchildren. If you read her diaries, she doesn't talk about them. Why does she talk about this girl? What was special about her? That's where the story starts. So it takes historical facts. It might be just a little thing, and you start going on with it. I'm now writing the book about Victoria, who was Sarah's daughter. And one of the things that I see is that Queen Victoria writes in her diaries, I saw my Black goddaughter. She heard about the death of her mother on the way to see me. And I started thinking, what did that girl feel like? Why did she go on to see the Queen? What solace would she have from the Queen? So I get it on a fact, and then I write around it. So, you know, but with doing the historical, doing the critical commentary, I'm now doing a lot of deeper dive into the history and the facts and saying, you know, when I write about this person, this is what was happening at that time. It might be the historical fact, it might be political, it might be something else, but it's based on finding something. I call myself a literary detective. I go in and I sort of, I look into little corners and get this clue here and that clue there. And then I work out, I thread the seeds and make them into pearls for my necklace.
Okay, I just want to tell about, you know, I wrote a poem called My Name is February. I wrote it in both languages. I was asked by the Ezekiel Museums to write a poem about the ship that they found at Camps Bay, near Cape Town. And they found it was a ship that sank in 1794, the Sayo Chain, with 500 slaves on board, on the way to Brazil from Mozambique. So they asked me, they're going to have a media release, can I write a poem and then recite it? And it was torture, because I knew I had to do it very well. And I battled, I don't know if I battled for a month or so, but the poem came on a Friday. It came in the language Afrikaans that was made by the slaves. When I remember what my uncle told me, my uncle told me that the Februaries, where I come from, were also called die Masbiekers, the Mozambicans. Those were slaves from Mozambique. And then I had the title of my poem. My name is February. And I knew I had to take this poem to very close to me and to my people, and to sketch in the poem that I'm not free yet. I'm walking ruined like the Sayo Chain, and that I'm looking for the rod of the steering wheel, because I want to go see where's the family. They're lying on the floor of the sea. The mother's hand in the father's hand, and the little girl's hand in the mother's hand. How deep are they lying? So when someone reads from my community, read that poem, they must know, and especially if their name is February and January and October and France, that's where their ancestors come from.
Yes, yes.
So Philippa, I don't know if that answers your question also on my writing process.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I think then we might conclude. But to give a question. Somebody's now finding Charles Dickens very interesting. and he has a question.
Okay, let him ask the question, because I have to say something about Charles Dickens after that.
Yeah.
Hello, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Oh, I'm pleased. I'm fresh as a rose. I would love to know exactly how is it that Charles Dickens's history is so buried, and we know so much about the heroes of Black people who fought for Black people, but this guy is a white person, but we don't know about him. Rather, we know about those who fought by his side.
We do know about him. There's a lot of things about Charles Dickens, but some of the things we know is what has been perpetuated. They talk about Charles Dickens because of the kind of things that he wrote, about how he fought for the poor. He wrote about the poor. He wanted social injustice to be noticed, and so on. Wonderful. I did that film 3 years ago, but somebody said something to me, and I started looking at a different side. And somebody said, oh, it's not very well, but you know, he was a racist. And I go, that person
okay.
cannot be a racist.
Okay.
But then I started looking at it. The man was a racist. So I have written a piece, which is online under Writer's Mosaic, saying, what do you do when you admire somebody's work, be him a painter, a writer, or whatever, and then you find out that they have feet of clay? Do I now say I will never read another Charles Dickens? Do I throw those books away? What was he writing of his period? Because when you stop to think about it, the only time he wrote about a Black character was in Martin Chuzzlewit. That was immediately after he came from America. But he wrote several books. He was writing in Victorian times. There were Black people around. He did not write about them in any of his books. Why not? Why not? I started looking at different questions. So he took this bit about the American notes and he was championing them. But for how long? Was that his true feelings, or was that to do with the fact that he found out that they were plagiarizing his work and they were not paying him? So we have to start looking at when we, and it goes back to the thing about Mansfield Park, when we have these canons, these authors, these people that we admire, let's just take a breath and look at it deeper in the context. But as a writer, do I write what I feel and think at this moment without thinking about how are they going to change it, or how are they going to read it in 50 years, 40 years, 100 years time? And as a writer, do I have the right to change what they've written? Should I change words that they've written because it is no longer appropriate? Or should I say that's what they wrote, but that's wrong for us? But I can't go back and change it. Would I want somebody to change what I have written down now in 20 years, 30 years, because they think that it's not appropriate anymore? We have a question that as writers, but also as readers, we have to start asking.
Yes, okay. Love you. Should we?
Right, so I think we'll finish there to give the next session a chance to set up. Thank you very, very much, Annie and Diana.
Oh, are we done? Oh, that was so quick.
It went very quickly.
But thank you so much.
No, we loved it. And I think this is the beginning of a series of conversations. And I'm also loving the way that this is very much about writing community, how to write and in the writing, find the community, create the community, think of the past community, think of the future communities. And
yes,
we're all very grateful for both your work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie.
Yes, Diana, I long to see you face to face sometime.
Yeah,
yes,
you must.
Yeah, we will. We'll work on it.
Okay, thank you so much for. I feel honored to have been part of this.
No,
thank you.
We're honored.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, Annie.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.